What's your best fire me? I freaking dare you moment from work. Worked for a newspaper, editing and actually putting the paper together, arranging it all, placing stories and pictures where they need to be, titling, quoting and sourcing everything. I was a one-man team and used an overly complicated system that I figured out how to use really effectively. They treated me like crap, set impossible deadlines and berated me for not meeting them. One day the boss tells me to fully put a paper done by the end of the day, gave me no warning. I had no articles from the journalists and no photos from photographers. It was my job to collect it all from everyone and he wants me to do it in a single day? I told him no, if he wants it done, he has to give me more time. He tells me if I don't have it done by the end of the day I'm fired. I tell him that this paper can't function without me. He tells me I need to take the day off and cool my temper and that he'll do my job for me. Get a call an hour after I get home that he needs me to come in and do it and I can have as much time as I need. Promptly quit on that butthole. Frick your crappy newspaper. Best one. Only took an hour of having to do your job to make them say frick this. I was 17 and working part-time at a fast food restaurant. Someone wrecked the men's restroom, shat in the urinal, rubbed crap all over the wall. The manager came out and told me to clean it. I refused. She threatened to fire me, to which I laughed in her face and told her you can clean it yourself or you can lose an employee and still clean it yourself. I don't need this job. Needless to say, I wasn't fired and I didn't clean that up. I still laugh thinking about it. Worked a job where I was the only one who knows how to take apart, clean, fix, and put all the equipment back together and do the weekly and monthly maintenance. Had a boss tell me one day that I was doing a poor job and not doing enough and that anyone could do it. If I didn't step up I would be fired or else as they had manuals for each piece of equipment. So that night I took apart all the equipment, weekly and monthly stuff too, cleaned them, and then just left it apart for them to figure out that morning. Then I turned off my phone after getting home for the entire day as I had the day off. When I turned it back on the next day I saw that I had initially received angry texts ordering me to return and put everything back together. This lasted an hour. Then texts saying I risked being fired. Then texts begging me to return. Then more texts trying to compromise with OT. Then an apology before nothing else for the rest of the day other than that the head boss wanted to see me as soon as I came in the next day. Came in the next day and over half the stuff was still not put together and what had been put together was put together haphazardly and would need to be taken out again then put back incorrectly. Was immediately asked to be seen by my boss and their boss to explain myself the moment I was seen entering. Once in the office I told them that if they weren't there to apologize then just fire me then and there or drop it and let me put all the stuff back together. They looked at each other and then told me that I could get back to work. Boss never called me lazy again. Should have asked for a raise too lol. I once called in sick to my part-time job at Club Monaco. My manager told me that if I couldn't find anyone to cover my shift, I was going to be fired. So I FaceTimed her from the air and had the doctor explain to her that I needed an MRI cause they wanted to make sure I didn't have a brain tumor. Wouldn't be shocked if that shitbag manager still fired you. When I was 17 I worked a summer holiday job at Pizza Hut. I had transferred to my hometown restaurant from my university town restaurant. I was there for 5 weeks and hadn't been paid yet. The dickhead boss claimed it was because I gave him the wrong employee number. I hadn't. Anyway, after 5 weeks of no pay I rang him on New Year's Eve, i.e. busiest night of the summer, and said I wasn't coming to work because I wasn't a volunteer and I wasn't going to work for free. He told me if I didn't go to work I may as well not come back as I would be fired. I didn't go to work and had a fun New Year's instead. Then a few days later I called the employment tribunal, I'm in New Zealand, and told them what had happened. They called my dickhead boss. He then called me, offered me my job back and was nice as pie for the rest of the summer. You have to be a real dickhead boss to think that you can threaten someone that you've yet to pay for more than a month of labor, especially when there's a whole government department just waiting for someone to let them know that their employer is withholding their wages and is only a phone call away. I worked at an unspecified telecom a few years ago. I was a senior manager in charge of programming. third level support, and production support. A business unit bullied through code changes made by the business side through a side deal with a legacy programmer in the data center, circumventing my team, QA and production testing. That just had to get implemented immediately without going through any testing at all. I refused. The CIO overruled me. 72 hours later, phone activations had ground to a halt. Customers nationwide were screaming, and the CIO called phone conference after phone conference demanding timelines for when I was going to get this crap fixed. He kept screaming to have members of my team to get on the phone and explain themselves to him. I refused. Finally I snapped and told him that if he wanted me to fix his mistake I would need to get off the freaking phone, go work with my teams. And the only reason they hadn't walked out yet was that I was keeping him off their asses. But we would all happily go together. 24-ish hours later QA and my team had the balls cleaned up and fixed for a clean rollout. This was all to avoid a 24-hour delay for QA production testing. I wish I could say that was the only worst time. Thanks for protecting your team. I have mad respect for leads who do that. There's enough madness for everyone to deal with without the unnecessary wrath of management in the mix. Husband was having his gallbladder taken out and was having complications before surgery. I needed to leave early from work for about 2 hours and my boss threw a fit stating I couldn't leave. I told her I had 300 hours of sick time I can use for myself and my husband, and if she wanted to push I'd take all of it at once, leaving no one but her to do my job. She said she'd fire me if I tried. I just looked at her and said I have to go, I'll send you my DR's note. I wasn't fired. I was actually awarded that year for job performance. Over the first year I worked there, I essentially took over most of the tasks in my department which were previously held by other departments and was done badly because of it. This led to a massive increase in productivity. I then found out I was paid significantly less than what others were making and others in my position across the industry were making. So I go to my boss and tell them I had done all this work increasing productivity and I would like to discuss a raise. They said no. So I worked there for another year, asking for a raise every now and again until I was offered a job that paid double. It didn't start for a couple months, so I held on to that job until I was set to submit my 2 weeks. I asked for a raise again, thinking what the heck, why not? My boss goes off, tells me I won't get a raise and says some very colorful things about it. It culminated with her telling me if you don't like your pay, maybe we should evaluate your future at this company, to which I replied already have. I took another job and this was your last chance to offer me what I deserve. I quit and walked out of that office. Friends told me that my sudden departure caused a massive backup of work that ended with my manager being fired for it. God, I can only imagine how awesome it must feel for your boss to say maybe you should evaluate your future here and to be able to say to their face, already have. Bye. Worked for Radio Shack and always butted heads with the district manager. He wanted me to use these ridiculous sales techniques that might work in a big city but were really pushy. The year he became our DM I won a contest for best salesman in the whole company, out of about 14,000 employees. And I did it without being pushy and forcing stuff on people. He still tried to get me to use these ridiculous techniques each month when he would visit. But after I won the contest I stopped sugarcoating it and would flat out tell him that's stupid. I'm not going to do it that way. Being pushy is the best way to talk yourself out of a sale. As a customer, when I am approached by those types, I will almost always walk away, even if I need what they are selling. I was a summer teacher at one of those Korean SAT prep school that hired US college students for a summer and then promptly worked them to death. Although, I will admit the pay was pretty good. We taught 8:30 AM through 5:30 PM with an hour lunch, but had homework to grade every evening, prep work, etc. Well, they were mainly focused on teaching English, but I was a math and physics major, so they had me teaching SAT math and college prep physics. No problem. Then they decided since I studied physics, I should also teach their chemistry class. I tried to tell them I didn't know much chemistry, but they insisted. So I worked my butt off, refreshing myself on all of the stuff before I taught it, while still teaching another math and physics class. One day in the middle of this I got legitimately sick. I called in the night before, per the rules, and told them I couldn't come in. I took one day off, sleeping in my apartment, and then drag myself in the next day. When I show up, they pull me aside and say, so how do you plan on making up the time for the classes you've missed? Excuse me, well, we didn't have anyone to teach your classes, so all the kids are behind now. You have to make up the time. We figured you could just extend your morning class an hour for the first week, aka teach over lunch, and your afternoon class could then start an hour early for the next week. Why didn't you have a sub teach my class? Then they screwed up. They said we don't have a sub. Well then, no, I'm not going to skip my lunch because of your guys' poor planning. We'll fire you, and then you won't get your plane ticket. Remember, they replied. Go ahead. First, I followed the rules and gave you notice I was going to be out. Second, you just told me you don't have a sub for my classes. That means if I leave, you're going to lose all of those students that I'm teaching. That will cost you a lot more than the planet ticket will cost me. Was 19 and working a minimum wage job in a shop. Owner sold the business to a new guy who had never worked in the industry and knew nothing about any of it. His first day in charge, he decides I look unprofessional and should be wearing a uniform. Then he decides the uniform should include a fluorescent cap with my name embroidered on it. I told him I wouldn't have taken this job if it had included wearing a fluorescent cap with my name embroidered on it, but he tells me it's going to be mandatory from now on, so I will be sacked if I don't wear it. Fine by me. I'll be leaving for any other job which pays exactly the same but doesn't make me wear a ridiculous hat, and I'll take with me my good relationships with all our contractors and suppliers, and my knowledge of how the frick all your equipment actually works. Reader, he didn't fire me, nor was I presented with a spiffy new hat when all the other employees got theirs. I did leave about 2 weeks later though, as he was an insufferable twat face with a real anger issue, and was impossible to work with. Was very tempted to pop in and visit wearing a cap with my name on, but I didn't want him to die from rage. I'm a speech therapist. I work in a skilled nursing facility. For the most part, they all suck. This is no exception, but the place I used to work, the boss was a scumbag, to the extent that the entire rehab staff signed a letter asking to get him fired. He was basically forced out. I eventually left and came to my current job. I swung by the rehab gym and saw his butt sitting in my current boss's office. I kind of froze in shock. I thought he was interviewing for a job there. So I went to the boss at the time and told her flat out that if he got hired, I was walking out immediately. She got a stunned look on her face and quickly assured me that he wasn't working there. That was my first time drawing a line in the sand like that. This was about 5-6 years ago. I was the second in charge of our shipping department, making $11 an hour. The head of shipping had a mental breakdown, so I took over while he got help. About 3 weeks after he returned, the company released him because they didn't like him and I could do the job. When they told me they had released him, I asked if there were going to be interviews for the job, or was the job just mine since I was number 2. I was told they were looking, but I would have a chance to interview once that process started. Fast forward about 6 months and I'm still doing this job that pays around $50k a year for $11 an hour. We had some issues with staff turnover and process changes because the warehouse manager thought he knew best and would listen. They then tell me there wouldn't be a shipping manager, just a shipping lead, which would be an hourly position. I ask about a raise, get told my review is in 2 months so just wait. I wait. 3 months. 4 months. Then one day, after a 14-hour night shift, I get a call from the WM telling me I have to come in right now. When I get there, he unloads on me for things that were beyond my control and mistakes other people made. We start yelling, and that's when I told him, I make $11 an hour doing this job. Ex-boss told me he got paid $50k a year to do. I don't need this crap. Give me a raise or I won't be back. I then went home and back to sleep. When I go back to work, I'm met by WM and ops manager. They appreciate the hard work I've been doing and are putting me on a salary starting at $45k since ex-boss was there longer. I negotiated up to $48k. Nice. Please use your new title to look for other work, just in case. They don't sound very competent. For the past few years I've worked at one of the nicer restaurants in my small beach town. I'm one of the only servers there who cares about doing a good and I'm the only one who doesn't take a smoke break every 15 minutes. This past summer a new, very illegal, rule was implemented that if we messed up an order in any way we would be liable to pay for that messed up food. I usually didn't have a problem with mess ups, so I didn't bring up the legality of this matter since I make good money and don't want to start fires in places that don't concern me. That until I rang in a cherry glaze burger instead of a cherry glaze steak, each stylized CGB and CGS in our crappy computer system. I fixed this with the kitchen, but not before they had already started the burger. I told my manager and she just gave me a disappointed and told me that the rules are the rules. I then dived into both federal and state workers' rights code and told her she would never see me again if I found any money out of my tips at the end of the night. Never had a problem fixing an order again. Was working in a restaurant. Already knew I was sick, but our managers were buttholes and I knew if I called in they'd be extremely pissy. Showed up to work around 8 am. By 9 am I knew I wasn't gonna last the rest of the day. Managers still made me stay. Around 9:30 I was pre-bussing my tables and just the sight of half-eaten food pushed me over the edge. Managed to hold my vomit until I got to the dishwashing area but puked in a trash can immediately after putting my plates down. A co-worker saw me and vouched for me when I went to tell my manager I was leaving for the doctor. He said, even with a doctor's note, if you leave work today you'll be fired. I said, you have human waste in a kitchen trash can and haven't even done anything about it. It's on camera. I'm leaving. Showed up for work a few days later and didn't hear anything about it. Ended up quitting a few weeks later for a job at a couple considerably higher scale restaurant. Put in my 2 weeks notice at wildly understaffed job. 6 days later got sick. I call around and see if anyone can take my shift. No one is available. Tried to call out that morning. Crappy manager tries to persuade me to come in even though I am barfing everywhere. I non-committally agree to call in later in the day to see if I am feeling up to coming in anyway. Call back. Say I am still sick and will not be coming in. Manager blows up at me in front of customers, being rude as frick. Eventually asks what I expect to do about the shift needing to be covered. I say I have done everything I am required to and it sounds like a management problem to me. Hang up and turn my phone off. I was elbows deep in an AT&T Unix machine that should have been replaced a decade before, parts strewn all over a desk, when the client came in to see what was taking me so long. Me, you've got 3 dead fans. One of the power supplies has failed. There's a bad CMOS battery and the video card is glitchy and refusing to allow the machine to POST sometimes. Client, so how long is that going to take? 15 minutes? Me, laughing. I can patch things up in a couple hours, but I'm going to have to come back in a few days with new parts. Client, if you can't fix it in the next half hour you're fired. I'll find someone that knows what they are doing. I stood up, grabbed my tools, and started walking. Client, where are you going? Me, I told her how long it would take, and that's longer than a half hour, so I guess I'm fired. My firing lasted about 3 more steps towards the door. Man, oh, man do I hate bossy people who do not even know how things work. Worked at a private medical college in Punjab, India. They wanted me to falsify patient admissions to get increased grants from Govt. I refused. They said that I would be fired. I was the only resident with specializing in orthopedics. I was let go. Then came surprise checking by Gov medical body. I was offered 3 times my monthly pay to attend for 1-day inspection. I asked for 5 times and they agreed. I ditched out at the last moment. They lost their recognition of depth of orthopedics with insufficient residents. No admission in ortho till next checking. That's freaking evil. I love it. 2004. Worked at a municipality department. One day the programmers update the work PCS and block pretty much everything and anything. No internet at all. No authorization for installing anything. All games removed from Windows. They even removed the calculator function for some reason. Then the supervisors started moving co-workers around and my entire team was dispersed across a gigantic building. For no reason. We were the top team in terms of results. The supervisors simply hated our guts for some reason. So me and one of the co-workers tried to devise some way to have communication without having to travel for 5 minutes each time, across the building and down a floor, just to get to each other's desk and ask a simple yes or no question. We do this during our lunch break. Our supervisor butts in and asks what we're doing. We explain we're trying to save time and maximize communication and results. The supervisor, who doesn't like us anyway, says we should get back to work and quit trying to communicate through unauthorized means. Okay, we simply stopped trying to install Messenger on our phones. One day later the supervisor is looking for my coworker. I don't know where he is. I say so. Well then contact him through your Messenger program. The one you told us to quit installing? Yes, we gave up on that. On your orders. She tried to get me fired for refusing to obey basic orders. I explained the situation to her superior. He let me get back to work and told me to ignore her from then on. I moved to a better post a few months later because she made my life unbearable from that day on. And I finally went and told the upper floor they'll either move me elsewhere or I quit. My dog became very ill quite suddenly and he needed to be put down. I was at work and I asked to leave half an hour early so I could be there for him. I asked my manager and she got annoyed and said there was no way and that I should have told her earlier. I said I'm sorry, I didn't realize my dog was going to die in the most sarcastic way possible, then walked away knowing she'd follow me. I then stood at my desk and typed my resignation up in front of her. She gave me the time off. No one was going to stop me from being there for my boy. I was working at a shoe store in a mall and I requested a week in August off for my wedding. My manager told me her boss wasn't happy about that and all I said was my wedding is more important than back to school sales. They didn't fire me, per se. They just stopped scheduling me and eventually my access to the employee website went away. That's called constructive dismissal and is illegal in some circumstances. I used to work at a small, family-owned grocery store for a few years. We got our load in on Mondays and Thursdays, and we got passed over one Monday and the distributor said we'd get the missing load in on Thursday. So, what essentially happened was a double load and my two receiving partners were out sick. I was the only person in the warehouse receiving at the time, and got to take on 15 plus pallets of groceries that needed to hit the shelves immediately. I was specifically told to not go up front, and to do what I could while the front end crew covered the aisles and cash registers. Well, a lot of them were either lazy, untrained, or just putting in their hours so they could pay bills. I put in my earbud, just one, and get to work. I'm halfway through the checking in the pallets when I get called up front, so I ignore it and continue. Then I get called again, so I head up there and get yelled at by a new hire with a bad attitude to do your job and bag for me. The customer was a regular and we got along very well, and she told me that she was fine and could bag her own groceries. Between the customer and the fact that I wasn't having it, I walked away. I had 3 years and 2 ranks on her, so I didn't give half of a crap and went back to my pallets. Then I get the newest hotshot manager, who replaced the old hotshot manager, who replaced the beloved manager who trained basically the whole store, in my face about having an earbud in on the clock, which is allowed as long as you have on ear free, and said I could be sent home and not come back if I wanted to listen to music. So I gestured to the pallets and said go for it. These all need to be checked in and broken down. Have fun. I got to keep my earbud in, so I had that going for me, which was nice. Never make threats that you can't keep. Such a simple concept. First kitchen I worked in, they told me, the more jobs I learned, the more I'd get paid. Came in basically knowing all of it anyway. 6 months later I had learned every job there except one spot. They told me if I learned that spot, I'd get a raise. I told them I could find a new kitchen. I was easily one of the best employees there, and that I was told the more I learned the more I'd get paid, and I still hadn't been given a raise. Head chef cracked and gave me a raise. I told him 50 cents wasn't enough. He was forced to give me another. 2 weeks after that, they fired the banquet chef's assistant. We had a lot of 300 plus people events, and told him to pick his new assistant. He immediately requested me. I told them I needed another raise. I was told no again. Again I said I'll find a new job. Came in the next day and put my 2 weeks in. Yup, found the job that quick. Wound up making more money in that kitchen than anyone beside the banquet chef and the head chef. That's how I wound up getting 3 raises in a month. It's amazing nowadays that you always have to or almost have to jump ship before you get a raise that's worth keeping you there. I'm sure everyone's had that tyrannical boss who was so drunk with power that everyone hated him and he felt like that was a sign that he was doing a good job, right? About 20 years ago I was working as a delivery driver at a Pizza Hut and they transferred in a manager who couldn't seem to get along. The area supervisor point blank told me that he was on his last leg and if he caused any problems they were going to let him go. I was kind of the lead driver, no title or extra pay, but I was the one who trained new drivers and for some reason this guy decided I needed to be taken down a notch. Just harassed me and was on my crap constantly. Surely the office told him he needed to adjust his attitude, but I'm not sure if this guy was capable. Anyway, one day I told him to frick off. I was more valuable to the store than he was, and if he really wanted to show who's in charge he should learn how to do his job better. He flew into a rage, swept a big stack of lids off of a shelf and ordered me to rewash them and put them away. I just punched out and went home. It was the middle of the afternoon and I was the only driver at the time. About 30 minutes later I get a call from the supervisor telling me to come back because they were taking care of things. Got back just in time to see him sulking off with his termination papers. I don't typically take pleasure in other people's pain, but it actually felt pretty good. I hope he learned his lesson, but somehow I doubt it. Well, not really work but still. I was an intern at a 3D printer company. The manager was a complete piece of shit. On my first week he made a co-worker cry because she sent an order to the wrong client. She apologized to the customer and he didn't mind. She sent the right one afterwards, however the manager screamed and yelled at her for the entire week. It was a small company and I was sitting next to her at the time, but I didn't know how to react to the situation because if I was afraid he would fire me and then I wouldn't pass class. Well, the week after that I made a wrong sketch of an advertisement and he just completely lost his mind. He screamed and yelled at me. I stood up, called my school and said what happened. They called the manager and was threatened to take his intern license away. I was left alone with my schoolwork after that and he never screamed at any of us ever again. Passed the internship barely, and he hated my guts after the incident. Peace. Sorry if my English is not that great. Company was doing badly in the 2008 depression. They hired an expensive new vice president to lead our division who asked me barely 1 month in to sack any 2 people from my team of software engineers whoever I felt like because she said so, as layoffs were necessary to ensure long-term stability or some such. I steadfastly refused and dared her to fire me instead, and the issue really blew up at the time. Before they could fire any of us though, a new contract came along which needed more people to execute than we even had on our roles. They didn't hire anyone new but we had to slog our asses to deliver the project. The VP got fired a few months later as she was way too expensive and wasn't adding enough value. Aircraft technician here working on an air ambulance on a very small island in the middle of nowhere. We used to be too lame. Licensed aircraft maintenance engineer. On this position cause we work 15 days 24 hours schedule, but a new company bought our old one and the other guy left for a position closer home, and after 6 months they haven't been able to fill the position and have to send a guy 15 days each month. Paying flights and hotel that costs 100-200 euros per day cause this is a very expensive and popular. I'm from this island and after lots of years out of home I'm happy to be back. They want to lower my salary 30% or get fired cause I get nearly twice what they used to pay. Told me to accept or they will put another guy on my position. Yeah, good luck finding 2 lame that want to live here when you haven't find one. Told my boss 2 weeks in advance that I was taking PTO on Monday and Tuesday. She approved it, no problem. I take the days off and went out of town for a school thing. I come back into the office on Wednesday and I'm locked out of my account. I talk to the operations manager, my boss's boss, who was the person who interviewed and hired me, to see what's going on. He told me that my boss said I disappeared and didn't contact anybody for 2 days. I explained it to him and he said no problem. I talked to my boss later in the afternoon and she is furious. Starts saying how I didn't tell anybody that I was taking PTO and thought I just suddenly quit. I don't know what the frick this bee was talking about because I told her 2 weeks ago that I was going to be out those 2 days and I have the emails to prove it. At this point I was the only person left on my team of 4 people who were there when I was hired. I was already planning on quitting in next month as I had to move for school. This bee had the audacity to threaten to fire me. I said, if you feel like you need to let me go for your mistake, go ahead. Ended up working there for another 7 weeks before leaving on my terms. Even got to use the operations manager as a reference for another job. The best is when there are written emails proving you are right and they still argue lol. I was hired on as a part-time assistant manager, and then immediately told I would be working part-time at 2 different restaurants. I knew things were shady as soon as they gave me 2 separate paychecks. Then, less than a month later, they had someone go on vacation and needed me to cover their shifts. Suddenly, I was working 80-hour weeks. At the end of the pay period, I took my checks into the office and asked why I wasn't being paid overtime. They said that they weren't required to pay overtime because technically I worked 2 jobs. I looked them in the eye and said, this is my 2 weeks notice for one of my jobs. They said they needed someone that worked 2. Are you formally telling me that my employer requires me to keep 2 separate payrolls so that you aren't required to pay me overtime? They said they couldn't afford to pay me overtime, and I stood my ground and told them that I would work a maximum of 40 hours per week. After a brief back and forth, they agreed. Then, about a week later, another manager had a death in the family. They scheduled me for 80-hour weeks again without asking, while the other manager took time off to grieve. Then, one day one of the payroll people came by one of my restaurants and politely asked, how are you? I said, I'm not going to lie, I'm a bit stressed about the amount of hours I've been working for the last couple months. Then, she said, you should be grateful you are getting paid. I immediately told her that wasn't true, because I was owed for overtime and not receiving it, and then called the office and informed them that they needed to either write me a check with back pay for all the overtime or reduce my hours to 40 hours per week by the end of the day. Then, I told them that if I ever saw a schedule that had me listed for even 41 hours, I would walk immediately. They met my demands in that they reduced my hours. I ended up quitting less than 2 months later anyways, because it's really a shady business. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.